This is the second installment of reading the chapters of the Conquest of Bread, the Bread book. If you haven't watched the first episode where we not only introduce the book, but we also read the first chapter, you should check out the video. I'll make a playlist for this series. But for today, we're reading chapter 2, Well-Being for All. And just in case you don't know, this is not an audiobook. It's me reading it, but also maybe talking to chat if they behave, but they never do, so I'm never talking to chat. So I'm just commenting from time to time, maybe giving some of my thoughts, sometimes explaining things that maybe is not that clear. We'll see how it goes. And if not, if I have nothing to say, if it's just so clear and we're just vibing so hard, I'll just be reading, and this will be an audiobook. All right. Chapter 2. Well-Being for All. Part 1. Well-being for all is not a dream. It is possible, realizable, owing to all that our ancestors have done to increase our powers of production. We know, indeed, that the producers, although they constitute hardly 1/3 of the inhabitants of civilized countries, even now produce such quantities of goods that a certain degree of comfort could be brought to every hearth. We know further that if all those who squander today the fruits of others' toil were forced to employ their leisure in useful work, our wealth would increase in proportion to the number of producers and more. Finally, we know that contrary to the theory enunciated by Malthus, that oracle of middle-class economics, the productive powers of the human race increase at a much more rapid ratio than its powers of reproduction. The more thickly men are crowded on the soil, the more rapid is the growth of their wealth-creating power. Malthus, by the way, was that the whole idea that the earth is going to be too populated, and kind of gives for some scary conclusion, right? Thus, although the population of England has only increased from 1844 to 1890 by 62%, its production has grown, to say the least, at double that rate, to wit, by 130%. In France, where the population has grown more slowly, the increase in production is nevertheless very rapid. Notwithstanding the crises through which agriculture is frequently passing, notwithstanding state interference, the blood tax, conscription, and speculative commerce and finance, the production of wheat in France has increased fourfold, and industrial production more than tenfold in the course of the last 80 years. In the United States, the progress is still more striking. In spite of immigration, or rather precisely because of the influx of surplus European labor, the United States have multiplied their wealth tenfold. However, these figures give yet a very faint idea of what our wealth might become under better conditions. For alongside of the rapid development of our wealth-producing powers, we have an overwhelming increase in the ranks of the idlers and the middlemen. Instead of capital gradually concentrating itself in a few hands, so that it would only be necessary for the community to dispossess a few millionaires and enter upon its lawful heritage, instead of this socialist forecast proving true, the exact reverse is coming to pass. The swarm of parasites is ever increasing. In France, there are not 10 actual producers to every 30 inhabitants. The more agricultural wealth of the country is the work of less than 7 millions of men, and in the two great industries, mining and the textile trade, you will find that the workers number less than 2.5 millions. But the exploiters of labor, how many are they? In England, exclusive of Scotland and Ireland, only 1 million workers, men, women, and children, are employed in all the textile trades. Rather, more than 500,000 work the mines, rather less than 500,000 till the ground, and the statisticians have to exaggerate all the figures in order to establish a maximum of 8 million producers to 26 million inhabitants. Strictly speaking, the creators of the goods exported from Britain to all the ends of the earth comprise only from 6 to 7 million workers. And what is the sum of the shareholders and middlemen who levy the first fruits of labor from far and near, and heap up unearned gains by thrusting themselves between the producer and the consumer, paying the former not a fifth, nay, not a 20th of the price they exact from the latter? Nor is this all. Those who withhold capital constantly reduce the output by restraining production. We need not speak of the cartloads of oysters thrown into the sea to prevent a dainty hitherto reserved for the rich from becoming a food for the people. We need not speak of the 1,001 luxuries, stuffs, foods, etc., treated after the same fashion as the oysters. It is enough to remember the way in which the production of the most necessary things is limited. Legions of miners are ready and willing to dig out coal every day and send it to those who are shivering with cold, but too often a third or even 2/3 of their number are forbidden to work more than 3 days a week because, forsooth, the price of coal must be kept up. Thousands of weavers are forbidden to work the looms, though their wives and children go in rags, and though 3/4 of the population of Europe have no clothing worthy the name. Hundreds of blast furnaces, thousands of factories periodically stand idle. Others only work half-time, and in every civilized nation, there is a permanent population of about 2 million individuals who ask only for work, but to whom work is denied. How gladly would these millions of men set to work to reclaim wastelands, or to transform ill-cultivated land into fertile fields, rich in harvests. A year of well-directed toil would suffice to multiply fivefold the produce of dry lands in the south of France, which now yield only about 8 bushels of wheat per acre. But these men, who would be happy to become hardy pioneers in so many branches of wealth-producing activity, must stay their hands because the owners of the soil, the mines, and the factories prefer to invest their capital, stolen in the first place from the community, in Turkish or Egyptian bonds, or in Patagonian gold mines, and so make Egyptian fallahs, Italian exiles, and Chinese coolies their wage slaves. Wage slaves. I'm working on a video about that right now. So much for the direct and deliberate limitation of production, but there is also a limitation indirect and not of set purpose, which consists in spending human toil on objects absolutely useless or destined only to satisfy the dull vanity of the rich. So far, what Kropotkin is saying is quite simple. It's that production is becoming more and more efficient. And we know that now. We're in 2023. Production has never been this efficient. What he argues for here is that though it is very efficient, there's like an artificial scarcity to everything that's produced, so that the prices of things remain high. We could argue that today this has changed. There's still an artificial scarcity, but things are still, except for maybe oil. Oil is made so that there's a artificial scarcity. You don't want to pump out as much as possible so that it's not to keep prices high. But in many other products, a lot of products are really, really cheap because we make a lot of them, and we make actually more than we need, which contradicts Kropotkin's point here. However, the argument that that capitalism has some elements of inefficiency is absolutely right, is absolutely true. He talks about the middlemen. He talks about, perhaps he's gonna elaborate on it, but there's many ways in which capitalism is inefficient. The fact that we have the amount of I've talked about this before, but the amount of cereal brands that we have so many cereal brands. We have so much diversity of so many different products that we don't necessarily need. And every different brand, requires so much people to run them individually. If we reduced the amount of brands that there was for really honestly some stupid competition, then we'd be much more efficient at creating cereal. You can use that example for other things. And there's other inefficiencies that capitalism have. That's just one of them. Oh yeah, Temer. Sorry. It's standard for electronic products to be made to be difficult / impossible to repair and breaking of terms of services. That's another way it's very inefficient, right? I often use forget that word. The fact that the lifetime of a lot of products is reduced, so that it's still so that people still consume them on a regular basis is extremely inefficient, an inefficient use of resources. Planned obsolescence. Thank you, Sematist. Sematist is my favorite type of chatter. Helps me out and isn't fucking annoying, calling me a tyrant and shit. Yeah, planned obsolescence is extremely inefficient. That's another example. Thank you, Temer and Sematist. It is impossible to reckon in figures the extent to which wealth is restricted indirectly, the extent to which energy is squandered that might have served to produce and, above all, to prepare the machinery necessary to production. It is enough to cite the immense sums spent by Europe in armaments for the sole purpose of acquiring control of the markets, and so forcing her own commercial standards on neighboring territories and making exploitation easier at home. The millions paid every year to officials of all sorts, whose function is to maintain the rights of minorities, the right, that is, of a few rich men, to manipulate the economic activities of the nation. The millions spent on judges, prisons, policemen, and all the paraphernalia of so-called justice. Spent to no purpose, because we know that every alleviation, however slight, of the wretchedness of our great cities is followed by a very considerable diminution of crime. Lastly, the millions spent on propagating pernicious doctrines by means of the press and news cooked in the interest of this or that party, of this politician, or of that company of exploiters. But over and above this, we must take into account all the labor that goes to sheer waste in keeping up the stables, the kennels, and the retinue of the rich, for instance, in pandering to the caprices of society and to the depraved tastes of the fashionable mob. In forcing the consumer on the one hand to buy what he does not need, or foisting an inferior article upon him by means of puffery, and in producing, on the other hand, wares which are absolutely injurious, but profitable to the manufacturer. What is squandered in this manner would be enough to double our real wealth, or so to plenish our mills and factories with machinery that they would soon flood the shops with all that is now lacking to 2/3 of the nation. Under our present system, a full quarter of the producers in every nation are forced to be idle for 3 or 4 months in the year, and the labor of another quarter, if not of the half, has no better results than the amusement of the rich or the exploitation of the public. Oh fuck! Change the scene. Yeah, taking a screenshot of this. I'll add it to the segment. But you guys don't get to read it. Thus, if we consider on the one hand the rapidity with which civilized nations augment their powers of production, and on the other hand the limits set to that production, be it directly or indirectly, by existing conditions, one cannot but conclude that an economic system of a trifle more enlightened would permit them to heap up in a few years so many useful products that they would be constrained to cry, "Enough! We have enough coal and bread and raiment. Let us rest and consider how best to use our powers, how best to employ our leisure." No, plenty for all is not a dream, though it was a dream indeed in those old days when man, for all his pains, could hardly win a bushel of wheat from an acre of land, and had to fashion by hand all the implements he used in agriculture and industry. Now, it is no longer a dream, because man has invented a motor which, with a little iron and a few pounds of coal, gives him the mastery of a creature strong and docile as a horse, and capable of setting the most complicated machinery in motion. But if plenty for all is to become a reality, this immense capital, cities, houses, pastures, arable lands, factories, highways, education, must cease to be regarded as private property for the monopolist to dispose of at his pleasure. This rich endowment, painfully won, builded, fashioned, or invented by our ancestors, must become common property, so that the collective interests of men may gain from it the greatest good for all. There must be expropriation, the well-being of all the end, expropriation the means. I think expropriation is the title of the next chapter. Is it not? Am I confused? Part 2. Expropriation, such then is the problem which history has put before the men of the 20th century, the return to communism in all that ministers to the well-being of man. But this problem cannot be solved by means of legislation. No one imagines that. The poor, no less than the rich, understand that neither the existing governments nor any which might arise out of possible political changes would be capable of finding a solution. We feel the necessity of a social revolution. Rich and poor alike recognize that this revolution is imminent, that it may break out in a very few years. A great change in thought has been accomplished during the last half of the 19th century, but suppressed, as it was, by the propertied classes, and denied its natural development. This new spirit must break now its bonds by violence and realize itself in a revolution. Whence comes the revolution, and how will it announce its coming? None can answer these questions. The future is hidden, but those who watch and think do not misinterpret the signs. Workers and exploiters, revolutionists and conservatives, thinkers and men of action, all feel that the revolution is at our doors. Well, what are we to do when the thunderbolt has fallen? We have all been studying the dramatic side of revolution so much, and the practical work of revolution so little, that we are apt to see only the stage effects, so to speak, of these great movements. The fight of the first days, the barricades. But this fight, this first skirmish, is soon ended, and it is only after the overthrow of the old constitution that the real work of revolution can be said to begin. All right, so far, we've talked about how the means of production have been so developed that they're super effective now, that we're ready to let these means of production work almost for us to be able to assure our well-being. Second, we've talked about the inefficiencies of capitalism, and now we're talking about expropriation. We're talking about the revolution. Kropotkin seems very certain that a revolution is on its way. It's coming, guys. It's right here. And he wasn't wrong about Russia. It took a bit of time there because this was written in, when was Conquest of Bread written? In 1892. So, like, what, 3 decades almost before the Russian Revolution? Oh, expropriation is chapter 4. I knew expropriation was coming. There you go. We're talking about it a bit right now. What he says right now is the revolution's coming. And we know about the first battles, skirmishes, but the actual revolution that happens, it happens after the first battles, when the old order is gone. The revolution happens when we build the new world, the new society. And this is what he's going to go on about. Effete and powerless, attacked on all sides, the old rulers are soon swept away by the breath of insurrection. In a few days, the middle-class monarchy of 1848 was no more, and while Louis-Philippe was making good his escape in a cab, Paris had already forgotten her citizen king. The government of Thiers disappeared on the 18th of March 1871 in a few hours, leaving Paris mistress of her destinies. Yet 1848 and 1871 were only insurrections. Before a popular revolution, the masters of the old order disappear with a surprising rapidity. Its upholders fly the country, to plot in safety elsewhere and to devise measures for their return. The former government having disappeared, the army, hesitating before the tide of popular opinion, no longer obeys its commanders, who have also prudently decamped. The troops stand by without interfering or join the rebels. The police, standing at ease, are uncertain whether to belabor the crowd or to cry, "Long live the Commune," while some retire to their quarters to await the pleasure of the new government. Wealthy citizens pack their trunks and betake themselves to places of safety. The people remain. This is how a revolution is ushered in. In several large towns, the Commune is proclaimed. In the streets wander thousands of men who in the evening crowd into improvised clubs asking, "What shall we do?" and ardently discuss public affairs, in which all take an interest. Those who yesterday were most indifferent are perhaps the most zealous. Everywhere there is plenty of goodwill and a keen desire to make victory certain. It is a time of supreme devotion. The people are ready to go forward. All of this is splendid, sublime, but still, it is not a revolution. Nay, it is only now that the work of the revolutionist begins. Doubtless, the thirst for vengeance will be satisfied. The Watrins and the Thomases will pay the penalty for their unpopularity, but that is only an incident of the struggle and not a revolution. Socialist politicians, radicals, neglected geniuses of journalism, stump orators, middle-class citizens, and workmen hurry to the town hall to the government offices and take possession of the vacant seats. Some rejoice their hearts with galloon, admire themselves in ministerial mirrors, and study to give orders with an air of importance appropriate to their new position. They must have a red sash, an embroidered cap, and magisterial gestures to impress their comrades of the office or the workshop. Others bury themselves in official papers, trying with the best of wills to make head or tail of them. They indict laws and issue high-flown worded decrees that nobody takes the trouble to carry out because the revolution has come. To give themselves an authority which is lacking, they seek the sanction of old forms of government. They take the names of provisional government, committee of public safety, mayor, government of the town hall, commissioner of public weal, and whatnot. Or public well? I think it's public well. Commissioner of public well, and whatnot. Elected or acclaimed, they assemble in boards or in communal councils. These bodies include men of 10 or 20 different schools, which, if not exactly private chapels, are at least so many sects which represent as many ways of regarding the scope, the bearing, and the goal of the revolution. Possibilists, collectivists, radicals, Jacobins, Blanquists are Blanquists are thrust together and waste time in wordy warfare. Honest men come into contact with ambitious ones, whose only dream is power and who spurn the crowd whence they sprung. Coming together with diametrically opposed views, they are forced to form arbitrary alliances in order to create majorities that can but last a day. Wrangling, calling each other reactionaries, authoritarians, and rascals, incapable of coming to an understanding of any serious measure, dragged into discussions about trifles, producing nothing better than bombastic proclamations, yet taking themselves seriously, unwitting that the real strength of the movement is in the streets. Kropotkin says, the revolution is coming, but we know we all know about the first battles and how the old order just leaves wherever the revolution happens. And then what he just said is, all right, once the old order left, now so many people are going to try to take power. So he talks about how people will try to take the government offices that have been there previously and try to put them to their, to whatever branch of socialism they adhere to. They try to shape it into that. But he says, the real strength, though, is not in the discussions and all of that happens in the at the council, but in the streets. All this may please those who like the theater, but it is not revolution. Nothing yet has been accomplished. Meanwhile, the people suffer. The factories are idle, the workshops closed, industry is at a standstill. The worker does not even earn the meager wage which was his before. Food goes up in price. With that heroic devotion which has always characterized them and which in great crises reaches the sublime, the people wait patiently. We place these 3 months of want at the service of the Republic, they said in 1848, while their representatives and the gentlemen of the new government, down to the meanest jack in office, receive their salary regularly. The people suffer. With the childlike faith, with the good humor of the masses who believe in their leaders, they think that yonder, in the House, in the Town Hall, in the Committee of Public Safety, their welfare is being considered. But yonder, they are discussing everything under the sun except the welfare of the people. In 1793, while famine ravaged France and crippled the revolution, whilst the people were reduced to the depths of misery, whilst the Champs-Élysées were lined with luxurious carriages where women displayed their jewels and splendor, Robespierre was urging the Jacobins to discuss his treatise on the English Constitution. While the worker was suffering in 1848 from the general stoppage of trade, the provisional government and the House were wrangling over military pensions and prison labor, without troubling how the people were to live during this crisis. And could one cast a reproach at the Paris Commune, which was born beneath the Prussian cannon and lasted only 70 days, it would be for this same error. This failure to understand that the revolution could not triumph unless those who fought on its side were fed, that on 15 pence a day a man cannot fight on the ramparts and at the same time support a family. The people suffer and say, how to find the way out of these difficulties. Part 3. It seems to us that there is only one answer to this question. We must recognize and loudly proclaim that everyone, whatever his grade in the old society, whether strong or weak, capable or incapable, has, before everything, the right to live, and that society is bound to share amongst all, without exception, the means of existence at its disposal. We must acknowledge this and proclaim it aloud and act up to it. It must be so contrived that from the first day of the revolution, the worker shall know that a new era is opening before him, that henceforward none need crouch under the bridges, with palaces hard by, none need fast in the midst of food, none need perish with cold near shops full of fur. That all is for all, in practice as well as in theory, and that at last, for the first time in history, a revolution has been accomplished which considers the needs of the people before schooling them in their duties. This cannot be brought about by acts of parliament, but only by taking immediate and effective possession of all that is necessary to ensure the well-being of all. This is the only really scientific way of going to work, the only way to be understood and desired by the mass of the people. We must take possession, in the name of the people, of the granaries, the shops full of clothing, and the dwelling houses. Nothing must be wasted. We must organize without delay to feed the hungry, to satisfy all wants, to meet all needs, to produce, not for the special benefit of this one or that one, but to ensure that society as a whole will live and grow. Enough of ambiguous words like the right to work, with which the people were misled in 1848 and which are still used to mislead them. Let us have the courage to recognize that well-being for all, henceforward possible, must be realized. When the workers claimed the right to work in 1848, national and municipal workshops were organized, and workmen were sent to drudge there at the rate of one SADs a day. When they asked that labor should be organized, the reply was, "Patience, friends, the government will see to it. Meantime, here is your 1 SAD. Rest now, brave toiler, after your lifelong struggle for food." Meantime, the cannons were trained, the reserves called out, and the workers themselves disorganized by the many methods well known to the middle classes, till one fine day they were told to go and colonize Africa or be shot down. Very different will be the result if the workers claim the right to well-being. In claiming that right, they claim the right to possess the wealth of the community, to take the houses to dwell in, according to the needs of each family, to seize the stores of food, and learn the meaning of plenty, after having known famine too well. They proclaim their right to all wealth, fruit of the labor of past and present generations, and learn by its means to enjoy those higher pleasures of art and science too long monopolized by the middle classes. And while asserting their right to live in comfort, they assert, what is still more important, their right to decide for themselves what this comfort shall be, what must be produced to ensure it, and what discarded as no longer of value. The right to well-being means the possibility of living like human beings, and of bringing up children to be members of a society better than ours, whilst the right to work only means the right to be always a wage slave, a drudge, ruled over and exploited by the middle class of the future. The right to well-being is the social revolution. The right to work means nothing but the treadmill of commercialism. It is high time for the worker to assert his right to the common inheritance and to enter into possession. So here, it's very simple. The whole idea is the right to work for all is not enough. What makes you better is to better your conditions, to give you the right to well-being, to give you the right to food, to lodging, right? To fulfill your needs. And Kropotkin says this has to be I'm dead. So what Kropotkin is he's putting the basis for the revolution as the fundamental concept of revolution is not to necessarily build a new way of doing from scratch on day one. On day one, what you want to do is give everyone like the means to survive, the means to live, right? In this period of political uncertainty and political imbalance, you want to make sure that everyone can feed themselves and everyone is fine. And through that, if I understand correctly, you are already creating the society of the future, right? You're already creating the basis through which you build society. You can try to write legislation and get together and do all of that, but by just giving everyone the resources to feed themselves, let's see how long it lasts before it overheats again. The thing is keeping us cold right now. We'll see how that goes. Do I take off the timer? Timer's gone. No, timer's gone. So by feeding everyone as a first principle of the revolution, you're already stating and creating the foundations of your revolution. You don't need it to be legislated and all that. Just let people be able to feed themselves. And when they do, they can then build society together. You know, it won't be the people who can already feed themselves that will build society. It's going to be everyone, because everyone can already be fed, and they can take care of themselves.